the union address tonight. It went about 90 minutes. We're now waiting for the Democratic response. That should happen in just a couple of minutes. In the meantime, we want to bring in our political analyst, Brian Sobel, once again. Brian, let's talk overview first. What was your impression of the speech tonight? It certainly was not a bombastic speech by any means.
No, not bombastic. I think he did try to find some unity. There were bombastic moments, Frank, where he said some things that I think Democrats were not going to agree with. Much of the speech dominated, or the main part of the speech dominated by the southern border and the security issues. That went on for some time.
Yeah, the president really trying to make his case for that border wall. Brian, how did he do, and do you think, did he move the needle when it comes to the Democratic response in trying to get that wall?
Probably not. The rhetoric was very much the same, but it was toned down. The whole speech actually was toned down a little bit. He usually speaks more caustically at times and that sort of thing. You didn't hear that tonight.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask you. There were a couple of interesting lines when he was talking about border security. At one point he said, "I'm asking you to defend our very dangerous southern border out of love and devotion."
Yes.
And then he also said, walls work, walls save lives, so let's work together, compromise, and reach a deal. Is that a softening, and is that
absolutely.
an opening?
Yeah, I don't think we've heard that kind of reference in any of his previous speeches, and I think it was his interest in trying to take the rhetoric down. And as you point out, when you mention love and devotion to our fellow citizens and to our country, that's different than we've heard previously.
Which is basically, I want that wall, I am going to build that wall, and I will not accept anything less than 5.7 billion.
Absolutely, or I will not accept anything that doesn't result in a wall.
Right.
And as we've been talking, tonight's address comes at a particularly tense time between the president and Congress since the government shutdown just ended a week ago. It was delayed because of the government shutdown. And a big theme tonight, Brian, was unity.
Yes.
He started his address tonight saying, "I stand here ready to work with you, govern not as two parties, but as one nation." Did he bring the country any closer together with this address?
I think generally the country will see this speech as the president's attempt to bring people together. Whether he succeeded or not, we will see in the coming days with Democrats in Congress.
He also talked about the infrastructure, an infrastructure bill. It feels like that's low-hanging fruit when it comes to a bipartisan deal. Would you get that impression as well?
Well, yes, and one of the things we talked about back at the time he was elected was go for things that can bring people together, and infrastructure was one of them. And here we are 2 years later, and we're still not dealing with infrastructure. And as you point out, and it's a great phrase, it's low-hanging fruit.
Other places he did try to find common ground was HIV. You mentioned infrastructure, the trade deal with Mexico and Canada.
Yes, both of those are true. He also, I think, worked very hard to reach across the aisle to recognize that there are more women in Congress than we've ever had before. And as we saw during the speech, that brought Democrat women mostly, who have come to Congress straight out of their chairs. He talked about the impact on new jobs in America, many of them filled by women. That was also,
and how there are more women in Congress than ever before.
Right, and I think all of those lines really were, dare I say, appreciated by Democrats.
Brian,
women and people of color.
Yeah.
Yes.
Brian, there's one thing, a couple of things that struck me as kind of odd, and one of them, it seemed like he just made a complete left turn when he talked about late-term abortion. And on a night when you're talking about unity, that is such a divisive issue.
Well, this is where, when I was saying a moment ago that he can be bombastic or caustic, this is where, he could have gone through a whole speech and not talked about that issue and addressed that some other time. So if you're trying to put together a speech that is a unity speech, you don't every so often throw in a grenade like that. And so, yeah, it tends to stick out when you look at the construct of a speech that he would say that, because all of a sudden, all the air goes out of the room and everybody starts saying, oh, we were just hearing some things that talked about unity, and as you say, then we take a sharp right or left turn, however you want to phrase it.
When it comes to foreign policy, North Korea is a big deal. We did learn a date tonight. He announced a summit with Kim Jong-un. He announced when that would be.
Yes.
And how significant is that?
Oh, it's huge, because Well, I think a lot of people will disagree with his assertion that had he not been president, we would be in a major war with Korea. At the same time, I think everybody realizes that that regime needs to be dealt with one way or the other, and if we can negotiate our way out of a problem, that's better.
He also took on Russia, and I thought that that was interesting. One of his lines was, "We will outspend and out-innovate others by far when it comes to military apparatus, military defense, and weapons." It was right out of Ronald Reagan's playbook. Was that to show that he will take on Russia, that he will be tough on Russia?
Yes, I think it was very Reagan-esque, and as we know, history showed us that the United States essentially outspent the world at that point and the Soviet Union, and helped collapse that that country, the whole Soviet Union at that time. And I think he was calling on the ghosts of the Reagan era to say, we will outspend you, we will out-innovate you, and we will win any arms race.
The president also touted his economic success. Tonight's address comes just a couple of days after a jobs report came out showing that 300,000 new jobs were added in the latest month.
Yeah, well, I mean, the numbers are undeniable, and that's the one, when you look at how a president is performing, give them their due on things that have gone well on their watch, but you have to bring up the other things that don't go well on their watch. So, he gets some credit for the economy, as he should, but other things haven't gone quite as smoothly as we know.
There was also another line that I thought was interesting. He said, "Tonight we renew our resolve that America will never be a socialist country."
Yes, another one of these kind of mini grenades that got tossed into a speech. That was directed at the Bernie Sanders very progressive wing of the Democratic Party, and one of those lines that you say, well, why did you throw that in? I mean, I don't know that most people in this country believe we'll end up as a socialist country. So saying it is an applause line for Republicans, but it requires the other side, in this case Democrats, to sit on their hands and to not kind of get with the spirit of the unity. So that happened 6 or 7 times in the speech that I counted.
And Brian, tonight we saw someone new sitting directly behind President Trump, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi.
Yes.
We're used to seeing Paul Ryan sitting there, and there's no secret that there's been a very tense relationship between Nancy Pelosi and President Trump. Did her body language, did her facial expressions give you any indication as to what she thought of tonight's address?
Well, she can be very stoic, and she was tonight. You saw nothing really indicating one way or the other how she felt about the speech. She was the Speaker of the House, clearly, and at one point it looked like there was some booing or something going on, and she kind of just gently waved her hand. I'd have to go back and look at the tape to confirm that, but she's in charge there, and you didn't see much change in her facial expressions. She spent a lot of time looking at the speech in front of her and just getting through it.
Oftentimes during a State of the Union speech, you hear the president at some point say, "The State of the Union is strong." I'm here to tell you that.
Yeah.
I don't recall him using the phrase State of the Union at all during the speech.
No, it's a good observation, because that seems to find its way almost into every State of the Union speech. And if you go back to Gerald Ford came out and said the State of the Union is not good, and went on to talk about all the things that were going wrong in America at that point. We heard the same sort of thing out of Jimmy Carter. So not even referencing the State of the Union was an interesting thing.
We are awaiting the Democratic response. Stacey Abrams is a rising star in the Democratic Party. She ran for governor of Georgia last year. What do you expect we will hear in her response tonight?
Well, I think she's going to counter with Democrat talking points. She's there for that reason. She is a rising star, as you say. This will be the first time that a statement has been, or a counterpoint has been delivered by somebody who's not a sitting member of some elected body.
And actually, speaking